Thank you everyone for participating. First, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional territory of the First Nations, including the Mississaugas, the Ashinabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat. I'd like to welcome everyone to OSEA's Deep Energy Retrofits, looking at private multi-unit residential buildings. We are transitioning our logo, so we have here our old logo and our new logo. You can look forward to that. So in this webinar, our purpose is to discuss the challenges and opportunities that owners and investors face when they're attempting to engage with deep energy retrofits. I'll just have a few introductory slides, and then we'll have the first panel that will cover different ownership structures of buildings with Stuart Galloway from SOFIAC and Detta Colli from Crossbridge Condominium Services, and Zain Shafiq, who is a real estate investor. Then we'll look at some public programs and incentives, and that will be the City of Toronto with Duncan, MacLellan, and Jamie Shipley from the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. And then we'll look at the implementation of retrofits and some things around that. That will be Enbridge by Scott Bullock and David Katz, who will be speaking on behalf of CABA. Just to jump into it. This, if you have not seen Corporate Night's analysis of their Earth Index that they've created, they have created this measure to look at the speed at which countries are reducing their GHG emissions as compared to what is actually required to achieve the commitments that they have set out. And so if you look at the arrow, you can see that Canada is actually furthest behind when it comes to meeting the building's decarbonization targets. And it's also a little behind when it comes to industry, waste, and transport. Buildings are significant because it's the third largest GHG emitting sector of these sectors after fossil fuels and transportation. So we'll look at the province now. So for the province, for Canada, it was the third largest sector. For the province of Ontario, GHG's buildings are the second largest emitter. And if you were to break down residential and commercial, residential would actually be like the fourth largest emitter because it's higher than the fourth largest section right now, which is agriculture. It also makes sense that Ontario would have such a high GHG emissions due to their residential sector because Ontario also has about 40% of the population of Canada. And if you look to the right, you'll see the different provinces and their residential building emissions by province. And you'll notice that Ontario is quite substantial, partly due to the population, but I think it's also a little bit higher than the population distribution. So we'll move on to the city, and we'll notice that the city residential buildings are actually the #1 GHG emitter. And the green section is all buildings, so that's both residential and commercial, and it's split about 60-40, and within that, it's about 60% residential, 40% commercial, and within the residential, it's split about equally between MURBs and single-family detached homes, which makes that about a third of thereabouts the city's emissions. So one thing to note is that the newer, greener building codes don't apply to existing buildings, and all of these buildings, or the majority, will still be standing in 2030 and 2045 when we have to meet those targets. So it's one of the reasons that we are covering retrofits. So one of the big reasons we're covering it is because it's necessary to achieve our 2030 and 2045 targets, but it's also really critical given our growing population and our growing energy needs, both from the additional population and from this new work environment where there's an increasing hybrid or work from home. So there's an energy shift from commercial to residential proportionally that is happening right now. It's also great for grid stability to become more energy efficient. And there are other benefits, including improved air quality, which individuals will benefit from. And as people become more aware, there may also be a resale value that people can benefit from. Of course, there are the savings from your reduced energy bills, and those can be used if you look at a long enough time horizon, to pay for the original cost of the retrofits. And we'll just move on to the pace of the deep energy retrofits. And we covered this a little bit when we were looking at the Earth Index from Corporate Knights. And these are two reports, if you haven't looked at, I definitely recommend them. The first is a very short retrofit acceleration open letter. And the second is a more detailed Energy Efficiency Canada report. And they both have some estimates there of how long it will take given our current pace. Our current pace being looking at an average of the last 3 years. And it's a long time. We're definitely not on pace to meet our goals. And without going into the details, you can see from the quotes there that we are not on track, but this gives you the scale of how not on track we are. Okay, and then we will go to the ownership structures. And so we're looking at the private ownership with MURBs in particular because private MURBs because they have a wider variety of ownership structures, whereas the municipal and commercials tend to have one owner or few owners, and they don't have these collective action issues that arise when you start to have multiple owners, as we'll see with condos. Also, you have a lower capacity in-house to undertake complex retrofit projects, unlike a large municipal or commercial endeavor. So with that, I will go back to our agenda and turn it over to our first presenter, Stuart Galloway. And I will stop sharing my screen. Or I think we're having some problems with Stuart. So we can start with Rob.
For sure, I will do that. Start my screen share. All right. On these webinars, it's always difficult. You don't get the viewer feedback. Can people see my screen? Hopefully they can. Thank you for the opportunity to share my perspectives on doing retrofits in condominiums, which from an owner's perspective has always been seen as a bit of a black box. So hopefully this will give you some insights into that. I'll do a little bit of an intro. I'm going to introduce Crossbridge myself a little bit during the course of the presentation, but just a little bit on my technical background. Chemical engineer. I think chemical engineers make the best energy managers, and have my CEM and CMVP as well. Did you hear the one about Crossbridge and the energy manager? Hopefully you didn't. Well, once upon a time, there was Crossbridge, and Crossbridge manages. So we don't own, we manage on behalf of the owners, over 350 condo corporations. And they've been doing this for about 40 years, mostly high-rise condominiums, almost exclusively in the GTA. And the average building is about 200 suites per building. And then came along an energy manager in 2012. That would be myself. And even before I had started, I'd heard that there was a huge opportunity for retrofits in condominiums. And that was at the time and continues to be true. And I heard lots of things in the progress of me starting and gosh, almost 10 years that I've been at Crossbridge. The first one being that residential is so far behind commercial. So we must apply technology. Technology must be the answer. And that was done with some success, a lot of limited success, because there wasn't consideration as to who the users of the technology was going to be, who's going to be receiving the data, what kind of technology was going to be in place, who is going to maintain this technology. Another thing that I had heard was, well, these condominiums don't really know what to do. So audits are the answer. And if you went to any presentation on multi-unit residential in the last 10 years, probably the first thing you would see as a recommendation is that they should do an audit. And when I've gone into these buildings, I often ask, have you done any audits? And they'll say, oh, yes. And they'll direct me to a pile and they'll wipe away the dust on all the audits that they've done, but they really haven't done anything with because they didn't know what that next step might be. Another thing I hear a lot is, well, the reason that condos haven't done very much is they have no money to do the project. So we need to implement an ESCO model and have that come in. And David and I were talking a little bit before the presentation itself. That was, I would say, doomed to failure from the perspective of ESCOs are used to dealing with sophisticated commercial clients. And when you bring this into a condominium, there isn't even agreement on the term of savings. So when they bring this guarantee in, it sounds wonderful. When the condominium board hears savings, what they interpret is that they're guaranteeing a dollar spend per year. And of course, the energy usage is impacted by weather. And even that, if you just left it at that, brought about all kinds of disagreements and then all kinds of insinuations around you haven't lived up to your guarantee and all kinds of arguments around that. So is the story a tragedy? Is it a comedy, which I might say sometimes it is? I'm going to suggest that this is a documentary, this story, and it's a documentary around human behavior. And the rest of the story around this is, it really comes down to, I think this is just the nature of the segment that in this particular case is condominiums. And I've written 4 points here. The first of which Jasmine has referred to as to why the take-up of retrofits hasn't been as much as we'd want it to be and will continue to be a challenge going ahead. That first one is the ownership structure itself. In a 200-unit building, there are 200 owners in that condo corporation. And each of those owners look at a condominium, at least from our perspective, as a transitional place with which to live. The average stay is about 6 years. So if we're presenting something even that is a 4-year simple payback, which sounds good, if you're on this board or you're a resident and you're saying, I'm only going to be here for another 3-4 years, I don't want to invest in that because I'm only going to be here long enough to perhaps get my money back and then not see any of the benefits. So ownership structure is something I've put first. That leads directly into the decision-making structure around it. You have a board of directors that are the ultimate decision makers, regardless of us being the managers there. These are lay people. And even perhaps worse than that is not only are they lay people, they're lay people taking from the residents themselves. So there's a really interesting decision-making dynamic to where you'll present something that you think makes all kinds of sense, and the board will vote to not do something or delay something. And when I'll ask them to say, is this something that you want to do? And sometimes they'll say, well, yes, I see the value in doing it, and I see the financial payback to do it, but I don't think the owners here will see that. The owners would rather do A, B, or C projects. So really interesting dynamic that these people are voted on to make decisions on behalf of the condo corporation, but they still consider the residents in making each of those decisions. The third thing, hard money, is these are set up, condo corporations are set up to be not-for-profit entities. So when you're going to them to say, this is the amount of money that you're going to need to spend to do this project, what you're asking them for is to dig into their personal pockets with after-tax dollars. There is no depreciation schedules that can be used, and therefore not being taken advantage of, that would help in the economics. The fourth one, as to leads to the nature of the segment, and this is looking us as managers in the mirror, is the struggle to get the managers' attention, because the managers are the gatekeepers often of these buildings. And what I've written there is that there's often no incentive for the managers at the buildings to take on these projects, because the savings accrue to the condo corporation, not the management companies. So a lot of the managers see this as extra work when they're dealing with people, pets, and parking, and the potential for failure as well. If this doesn't go well, then the board would come back and say, well, you introduced this to us, you brought this in, you need to fix that. And it sometimes is in that tone as well. Leading it here, I think the story can still end happily, and I believe that for two main reasons: that the opportunity is still there. These buildings are long-term assets, so although the owners may not stay for a long period of time, these buildings will remain condo corporation number 1, 2, 3, 4. The second thing that leads to this optimism is that condos have reserve funds by law. Condominium corporation has to set aside a certain amount of dollars to replace the systems that they currently have in place. So we can work with people, the engineers that actually design these reserve funds, to set in place some funding, if not for today, for the future technologies that we're seeing. And those certainly are funds that we can draw upon. That's their funds. They don't need to have a borrowing bylaw to use those funds to do energy retrofit projects. The final three points here are things that I'm going to suggest that these are things that we can do. I'd say as an industry, is we can shift our attitudes towards the condo segment. I often found that and find that we look down upon this segment as that they just don't have the expertise, they can't do it. I'd rather consider this as we understand what this segment is all about, and I'd rather work with what we have. Two things that lead to that is to acknowledge that there is no one magic solution to this. And I often find these magic solutions, which are often brought about by contractors that want to get into condominiums and sell a lot of these solutions, is they get a lot of airtime, unfortunately. And I find that maybe half of my time is spent looking at some of these solutions and saying the physics doesn't make sense. So perhaps we should look elsewhere. And in red, long time believer in focusing on data, and I think that'll change the conversation. When the energy water reporting and benchmarking, the EWRB, was contemplated in Ontario, and they took our feedback, I was supportive of this coming into condominiums, acknowledging this would be a extra cost to them. Yet I thought what it would do, and we've got some experience with this already, is it would show what the real performance is. So not an audit that might be based on nameplate data and assumptions of working schedules, but real performance. That real performance could be used to compare building usage, and you would have then buildings that thought they had LED lights, and they thought they had VFDs, and they thought they were operating as efficiently as they could because they had the equipment. I think that'll shift the focus to their operations, which will change the conversation. And with that, I say I hopefully believe this is certainly not the end of this story. We'll continue on. Thank you. And I will stop my share.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that presentation. And we do have Stuart with us now, I believe. And Stuart, if you can go ahead and share your screen, I believe you're on mute.
Hi, Jasmine. Jasmine, am I off? Okay, I'm off mute. Good. I'm afraid, sorry, I couldn't get in through my laptop. Would you mind putting those slides up? I can't. I've had to come in through my phone. So apologies for that. It was I hate it, you know, when you even start early and you have that stressful trying to get in, and it's like, oh no, it keeps locking me out. Anyway, I'll wait for the slides to pop up. But hey, everybody, as I say, apologies that I was delayed to getting in, but actually just watching a good portion of Rob's presentation, I think it's glad I'm glad I'm coming second actually, because there's a couple of things in there that I think are going to be helpful that Rob has mentioned as well. So just by quick introduction, my name's Stuart Galloway. I'm the EVP for, thank you, Jasmine. I'm the EVP for SOFIAC. I'm actually in a transition role at the moment, so I'm moving across to SOFIAC to head up, well, basically English-speaking Canada, so everything outside of Quebec. But I'm also the CEO, or the outgoing CEO, for Energy Services Association in Canada. So there's a couple of nuances here which might actually help and sort of will come to light, and probably more in the questions. So if you could flick to the next slide. So I'll just give you a very, very quick overview of what SOFIAC is, just because obviously that's who I am. I'm representing on this. So it was formed just over a year ago by Fondation Pension Fund, Econolaire Engineering. A lot of you may have heard of Econolaire, certainly, because they're big in this space. It was to bring accessible non-recourse financing to the area of deep energy retrofits. It does commercial and industrial as well, but it concentrates on MURB sector. And you can flick the next slide. So what we do is sorry, Jasmine, just flick over to the next slide. Yeah, so a lot of you may have heard about the CIB funding and how attractive that is, and absolutely it is attractive, but it's quite difficult to access, especially for MURBs, maybe the medium and smaller MURBs, and a lot of the larger ones as well. So what SOFIAC does is it actually takes, we joined with CIB insofar as they provide the debt to this portion of funding. So we take that 1% debt funding from CIB and we blend it with what is required by CIB as a 20% equity from Fondation, but it's all non-recourse. So it makes it more accessible now. And flick the next slide. So that 1% debt is extremely attractive, and especially in the current markets that we're looking at the moment. And SOFIAC does this by acting as the aggregator across different project portfolios. So whereas individuals might normally act as an aggregator and try and qualify, forget about that. SOFIAC takes that off the table and actually acts as that Canadian aggregator. And in so doing is able to provide that turnkey solution backed by guarantee. So coming back to Rob's point, how difficult it was about the energy guarantees, but not just energy, but GHG savings. So now let's get into the meat. So could you flick over to the next one? Thank you. And so how does this help MURBs with the current challenges? And I have to say, one of the big things I do agree with Rob, and I'm going to cover it in this, is that we do have to consider long-term paybacks. We have to consider long-term projects, and this is not a short-term fix. Traditionally, particularly in MURBs and commercial space, we only deal with what can we see in front of us and the obvious targets and things like lighting and such. The other part that I really agree with is there's no solution. There's no one solution that's going to fix everybody's issues. Nobody's going to come in with a silver bullet and suddenly everybody's going to be okay. So this style of work does apply to some, but not all. So let's put aside the altruism that there is no real government directive around minimum standards. And one of the biggest drivers that we are seeing at the moment, though, for change and why people are really getting attentive to this point is the issue around carbon pricing, or really it's carbon tax, I guess, but it's being called carbon pricing for dressing up to make it look nicer. So, oh God, I'm sorry, because I've got pop-ups and stupid things popping up on my screen at the moment. So when we're looking at the carbon pricing, but not only that, but who is actually going to pay for that? And really, carbon pricing is about, if we do nothing, we're going to pay more for just standing still. And that's something that everybody wants to avoid, not just MURBs. Nobody wants to pay more tax for no benefit. But who do we pay, both now and ultimately? How do we pass this on to a tenant and yet still keep our rents competitive and our buildings in high demand? And one thing that I was asked to really talk about on here was one of the biggest commercial challenges that we do face in this sector is the one of split incentives. And I'm sure you're all very familiar with that. But I'm only actually going to mention the first two on this slide here. And the first two, because they're the most applicable, I find anyway, across the MURB deals. And just by way of context, my background actually comes from deals. So it's about finding somebody with a problem and how do we structure something so that we can make that problem go away. And that's the reason how we set up SOFIAC. Is we looked at a lot of the things that stopped these projects moving ahead. A lot of those were referenced, funnily enough, in Rob's presentation. And how do we take those off the table to make it go forward? So a couple of those first things are split incentives. The first one is the energy split incentive. So just as you know, the tenant is the utility payer. Landlord is responsible for the technology that sits behind it. The reverse split incentives, which is where the tenant has an all-inclusive payment, whether they leave the lights on or not, a bit like a hotel deal. And a landlord is responsible for both the technology and the utility payment. And there's the other two below. You can flick the slide, please. Thanks. So to make these work, we must be prepared to be more comprehensive. Our projects must be more comprehensive. They must look at the whole life of the building. It's got to be a healthy building, and we have to keep that in mind at the heart of the thinking when we're looking at that. So the consequence of that, when we're looking at those whole life issues within a building, which is going to be better for the owners in the long term, we obviously are going to look at longer term paybacks so that we can ensure that the savings that are made actually cover that initial capital outlay. Because if we need to do that long-term thinking, we're actually talking really deep retrofits, and we want to avoid that carbon tax that's sitting there as well. But to do this, we cannot turn to traditional financing. It just doesn't work. It works in some cases. You might be able to go and borrow debt. You might be able to raise own internal capital dollars and save all the pennies away. But usually they're trickling away on a day-to-day basis as we patch things up. So please flick the slide. So the technical solutions already exist, and they enable some of the strategic deal structuring parameters. So if we have the technical solutions, and let's just say we know that we can make savings within our buildings, but how do we structure that into a deal that makes sense? How do we de-risk it from these longer term projects? And how do we underpin that long-term third-party performance guarantee? Because if we're going to rely on those savings, we don't want to actually run into trouble further down the line when we look at life cycle replacements and such like. So we can tick the next slide. So to match the technical solutions that are already in play, we now have to look at the market accessibility of the financing solutions that can match up with that. So, and it's not just SOFIAC, but there are other models out there that do this. So first off, upfront financing. We don't want to be increasing the rents because that's going to drive people out of the properties. And we don't want to be tapping those capital reserves. So we we can access now upfront financing for all the capital projects. We want it to be non-recourse as well. And non-recourse means that we don't take there's no lien over any assets. Somebody doesn't come along and take the boiler out because you failed to make the payments. So this is taken off the table. The MURB, it's a horrible word, isn't it? A horrible acronym, but the MURB owns the assets from day one. That means that they're also able to take other advantages, like they can depreciate the asset over time for tax reasons. So there are vicarious. And you can also build in then that avoidance of the carbon tax into that deal. Another one that was considered is the junior debt issue. So a lot of people, it's on their balance sheet. If I have debt, even though it's ascribed to energy savings, and even if the energy savings directly match the outgoing over the initial capital cost, it's still classed as on my books when it comes to I'm a MURB and I want to go and buy that building, or I'm a MURB and I want to do something else that is unrelated to the project. Whereas now we're seeing these facilities coming in as junior debt, which means that they're at the back of the bus. So if people go to RBC or one of the main high street lenders and they want to borrow some money to do another project, they only do the look forward test, and they look forward and say, who actually, if something goes wrong, gets their money before me? How much is my money at risk? Now these facilities coming in as junior debt, non-recourse, means that they're at the back of the bus, so it doesn't affect the client's ability to actually borrow money. We're also looking at current technology with real-time interface for both individual units and group monitoring of units. Extremely helpful now with wireless technology and everything, and it's day-to-day, minute by minute, and shared platforms that people can actually see. And the targeting now of the deeper energy retrofit solutions, offsetting some of those easy low-hanging fruits like the lighting with some of the harder, longer-term stuff. Long-term financing is available. At the moment, there's financing out there sort of up to 20 years, but 15 years is quite typical. And those deep energy retrofits are targeting not just the energy, but they're also targeting how do we minimize that GHG and avoid carbon tax down the line. Longer solutions with the ability to pass on to a new owner. So I don't know how long I'm going to own this building. So, okay, how do we take that risk off the table? Well, we look at that. It can be transferred to a new owner, or there can be a buyback facility, which is agreed up front, that goes through the property sales process. So last slide. Overall, the benefits to the landlord and the tenant can span the split incentives that we've identified. With a more desirable space, no outlay of capital required or tied up in borrowing capacity of the client itself, that they're able to continue to grow their business, which is essential. And it's all done in a way that reduces that exposure to risk and increases the organization's both desirability for its facilities and profitability. That's not easy to say, and its profitability. So last slide is just a thank you. So I want to say thank you very much, and apologies for the rough start to that. Thanks.
No problem. Thank you so much, Stuart. Glad you were able to make it. Just want to tell everybody online that if you have a question, you can go ahead and put those in the chat. I will try to do the best I can to convey those questions to the panelists. And so we'll look at Zain Shafiq, who will be speaking on behalf of relatively smaller investors, but still over 5 units. Go ahead.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. So I'm here representing Bluewaterhouse Capital, which is like Jasmine said, a smaller multifamily investing company that specializes in kind of a combination of high ROI, building turnarounds, but also deep retrofits. So kind of reducing carbon, carbon and GHGs as much as we can. So this is just a little bit about us. So we have 7-8 properties across Ontario and a couple more in different provinces. And like I said, our sort of real focus is just sort of trying to do turnaround projects, where we can sort of see a line of sight to reducing GHG emissions in that 50 to 80% range relative to the current baseline of the building when we actually sort of purchased it. So just a little bit about myself. I used to work and manage a mutual fund on Bay Street for the last couple of years and recently started off Bluewaterhouse Capital. I'm an experienced real estate investor, particularly looking at carbon reduction and turnaround type projects. I also am involved in certain clean energy startups and angel investing groups. But now it's kind of jumping into the actual meat of the presentation. The kinds of retrofits that we are sort of specialize in is the sort of stuff that other panelists have also sort of talked about. Basically trying to electrify usage within buildings. So basically that means trying to move off older inefficient furnaces and boilers. Also, if you have baseboard heating, over to kind of air source heat pumps or other kinds of ways where we can sort of use more energy efficient sources. So this would involve kind of improving the thermal envelope of a building, potentially putting solar panels on, basically trying to find that Venn diagram where we can kind of actually make money doing this while also significantly reducing GHG emissions. So with that kind of, that in the background, let's just sort of talk about some of the impediments that we see for, what I would say are smaller or medium-sized MURBs if you wanted to kind of do this. So I sort of listed out 4 or 5 big ones. And instead of reading the screen here, why don't I just go through the slides one by one, sort of hit off the high points. The first point that I'd sort of make is that there's no real significant government incentives to actually do this. So if you wanted to electrify consumption of energy in Ontario, which is something that we should want to do given how low carbon the grid is in this particular province. So there are no material provincial or federal incentives to kind of move off, for example, a natural gas boiler or furnace if you wanted to go over to an air source heat pump. Enbridge does offer some incentives for lowering your natural gas consumption, but it doesn't actually, incentivize you to move off natural gas entirely for a variety of reasons. I'd sort of compare and contrast this to kind of programs like Mass Save that you would have in Massachusetts. So 5-6 hours from here, if you were to drive, or like a 1-hour flight away, if you wanted to buy, let's say, an air source heat pump for a MURB building, depending on how you'd get classified by the government. So if you have like 4 units or 10 units or something of that sort, they'd give you somewhere between $1,200 to $2,500 a ton. So typically $3,000 to $6,000 on an air source heat pump, depending on the size, to kind of switch over to that from natural gas or propane, or which kind of lowers your cost by 30 to 40% on day one. And for example, they'll also offer 7-year zero interest financing that's backstopped by the state, so by the state of Massachusetts. So these are just sorts of things that other jurisdictions have in North America that Ontario, for example, does. So this particular one, lack of innovative financing options, really kind of goes back to what Stuart was just sort of talking about before. Most of the grants made by the Canada Infrastructure Bank typically are for much larger projects rather than the kind of smaller 15, 20, 30 unit type buildings that, for example, we specialize in. I'd sort of echo comments made before that if you wanted to put a solar panel on your roof, which would materially reduce your GHG emissions, depending on exactly where you are in the province, that might have a somewhere between 12 to 17-year type payback, based on all-in capital, which might make significant sort of GHG reduction sense, but would give you 6 to 10% IRR, which would be hard to kind of justify if you have to go over to CMHC on the back end for refinancing. Like conversions from natural gas to air source heat pumps or even to geothermal heat pumps, which we see as perhaps very big opportunities for buildings that are like 4 to 5 stories and lower. They make a lot of sense, but from an environmental perspective, but not necessarily from a payback perspective. Like those paybacks would be quite long for traditional financing. So this would be something that we would kind of highlight as a challenge. This is just one of our little pet peeves. If you want to add solar onto your roof, the net metering rules that you have in Ontario only allow you to add to do this if you have 1 meter receiving power from the grid, which is absolutely fine if you have your own single family home, but it's very complicated if you have a MURB building, so a multi-unit building where each tenant has their own meter. So for example, in one of our projects, we wanted to add solar where you have 20 separate meter tenants with their own meters. But to be able to do this, we have to spend $15,000 to $30,000 to reconfigure our meter setup just to actually be able to qualify for net metering under the guidelines that we have right now, which are completely a political and bureaucratic creation, not an engineering necessity, which means that, solar becomes, that much more complicated for medium-sized retrofits.
If I may jump in, I just want to let everybody know that we will be sharing the slides. So you'll have all of this and contact information. And just we could move along a little bit faster.
Of course.
Yeah, thanks.
The sort of one or two final points that I just make is that, this is obviously a climate change crisis, and Jasmine talked about how fast we had to be doing these retrofits to kind of meet Canada's, goals. But the permit process to actually go ahead and do this, if you want to kind of make some of these retrofits, is very onerous and slow, and it's very hard to sort of plan around. So I won't go into the details of this, but let's just put it this way: the government talks about climate change as an emergency, but municipal governments take a very long time to kind of actually help you do a retrofit if you need to apply for a permit. And the final sort of point that I'd sort of make is that many of these retrofits are almost necessarily deep retrofits, which are oftentimes very hard to do in a rental building because they do oftentimes require vacant possession or do require many units to be vacant at the same time if you're doing a full building system upgrade, which is very sort of hard to manage given our current landlord and tenant board laws. We understand that they're there for a good reason, but it does sort of make it quite complicated, especially if many of your tenants might not necessarily be on board, because these retrofits are very disruptive, almost by design. Yeah, that's probably it for me to kind of sort of hit off on the high points.
Great, thank you so much. If there's any Q&A out there, I see we have a couple questions here. We'll just briefly get into these before we jump onto the public incentives. Can you elaborate on carbon credits and if they can be leveraged in your underwriting? Not sure who that's for.
Actually, I can take that if you like, because I mentioned it in my presentation, I guess. So absolutely. So carbon credits can be incorporated as well. I talk about avoidance of carbon tax, that can actually be incorporated as well. So yes, carbon credits can be built into those payback deals to help offset. Same as probably MURBs may not qualify for this unless you are huge, but the wholesale markets, particularly in Alberta as well. So.
Okay, great. There is a question about heat loss and heat gain for older apartments. I think that's probably a little more technical than we're going to get into right now. So I'm going to move on to our next panelists that we need to get to. So if we have Duncan MacLellan and Jamie Shipley, we'll start with Jamie and move on to Duncan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll just share my screen. Okay, I'm just, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Just very quickly, I just wanted to highlight this new product that CMHC is offering because it's brand new to, we offered it, announced it in March. It's brand new to our suite of programs that we have. This is mortgage loan insurance, so it's not mortgage through CMHC, which you can get in the affordable housing stream through the National Housing Strategy, which we promote a lot. But this is our mortgage loan insurance product called MLI Select. It's replacing an older product called Affordable Flex. And the reason I wanted to point it out to you today is because we've basically gone from, but we're putting more emphasis on climate compatibility. It was always part of our minimum requirements for people to qualify for our programs. but affordability was the biggest, is what we were looking for, the end goal, the end outcome that we were looking for. So this kind of balances out the priorities. It puts it on a level footing with affordability. And then we still have accessibility, but the accessibility piece is not as, it's not as beneficial as it is for the other two. These are the, these are where it's eligible, where the loans are eligible. So improvements of existing residential buildings and purchase of residential housing and refinance of a project, and also purchasing and converting. We like to see a lot more work in this area of converting non-residential into residential. As you probably know, the challenges that CMHC is facing with increasing the housing supply and getting affordability under control. So this is what how this works, and I'm going to quickly show you how we score. But basically, the more outcomes that you achieve on the affordability is still in there, so people want to go down that road. But for this session, I'm going to focus on climate. So affordability, climate accessibility. The deeper you go and the more that you do, the more flexibilities you're going to get in your mortgage, and I'll show you that in a sec. But here under the climate, there's 3 levels that you can achieve, and under purchase and refinance, it's basically the minimum at 30 points would be a 15% decreasing the baseline level. So baseline would be what the building was at the existing time before you did the retrofit. And then increasing that or decreasing baseline levels by 25% and 45% to get to 100 points. So 100 points is the max. And once you reach 100 points, I did some little animations here just to make it fun. Those are the areas that we're looking at in the middle that I just pointed out to you, the how to get the points, the 15, the 25, and the 40, and then what those points represent on the bottom. So getting to 100, again, this is mortgage loan insurance. So somebody has gone to their bank, they're looking to insure the mortgage, or this is an incentive to insure the mortgage, because you get some flexibilities, and the flexibilities are reduced premium for that to 100 points would be 1% premium. Getting a higher loan to value, which is very important. So up to 95% can be a loan, leaving very little left to put in for capital. And then a reduced debt coverage ratio to 1 to 1.1, or $1 to $1.10, and then amortization up to 50 years. So you can see, like, as you score more points, from a 40-year to 45-year to 50-year, and then the recourse, if you get to 100 points, limited recourse. So this is very popular with people so far, and the uptake has been really big because of, in a lot of cases, getting that higher amortization to lower the financing. The debt cost for financing makes the project more attractable. And that, just quickly, I just wanted to highlight that program, and that's my contact if you have any questions. I'll leave that with you, and I'll stop my share.
Great, Duncan, you're up.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody's well. Some of you may know me, some of you may not, but my name's Duncan MacLellan. I'm with the City of Toronto Environment and Energy Division. We're also the Better Buildings Partnership. Not quite sure what name you know us over many years, but it started way back in 1996, me more recently. But what I'm going to have here is I have a bunch of slides that I'm not going to quite talk to them all, but I wanted them to be in there so that when they're shared, everybody will have all of the information. So we work under the umbrella of Transform TO, where we're actually trying to get to net zero by 2040 as a city. That was moved up due to 2 pieces. One, the climate emergency that was announced by our city and unanimously ratified through council. And then the other was through our new Transform TO strategy that went through council last fall/winter. And so there's a couple of interesting pieces here. Here's a little bit of more of the breakdown, as Jasmine was saying earlier. It gives a little bit more of where our emissions come from in our buildings. She kind of did the whole first part of my presentation, and then here is the second pieces. And here's our pathway. This is where we're tracking along as a City of Toronto in terms of our emissions. You can see our original goal of 2050, and then our updated goal of 2040 and where we need to get to. So as of right now, we are on target, but as you can see, there's quite a steep go ahead of us, which is our big challenge. As we go along Transform TO, we have some key guiding principles that we also want to keep in mind. This is particularly important to the MURB world and the affordable housing world. So I think those are the things that we always have to keep in mind as we go through and develop and deliver a lot of these programs and initiatives that we have. So we really realize that building owners, managers, contractors, and everybody are critical to climate action within the City of Toronto, and we want to work together with them to help enable projects and help improve the projects as they are going forward. So from there, we have this is our suite of offerings and programs right now at this point in time. We've separated them into a couple of different groups that help with support, guidance, enablement, financing, and then our policy side, where we're working on the existing buildings emission strategy and the Toronto Green Standard. So I'm going to talk to a few of these. I've got information on most of them coming up, but I'm going to highlight a few of them that would be important. So our navigation program is kind of our catch-all program within the Better Buildings Partnership. It really aims to basically handhold a building through the process of lowering their energy or lowering their carbon. We won't do these steps for you, but we'll be able to present the different steps and different financing options, different grant or bursary options every step along the way. And we realize that every building is different, so we're able to kind of go through one by one and help somebody who's really trying to pursue that low carbon future for their building. This is a new one that I'm going to talk to a little bit more. We actually have a webinar tomorrow on this as well. So if you go to the Better Buildings Partnership website, on the banner on the top, there will be a registration for that. But this is a deep retrofit challenge that we've got funded through Natural Resources Canada. They gave us $5 million to run this, and we're aiming to have approximately 10 to 16 buildings, MURB and office buildings, and we're providing up to $500,000 each to have a deep energy retrofit. We're hoping to demonstrate what a building needs to do to get to that point, and that it's possible right now with their current technology. And the way that we're presenting it, we need people to have kind of open to their data, their energy data, their costs, and all those pieces like that, so that we can use it as a presentation piece and go forward with that. So more details come tomorrow. There's quite a large. All the program managers will be on for that, and more details will be upcoming. We have a renewable energy team that helps with solar assessments and kind of brief assessments for energy storage and geothermal and geo exchange within the City of Toronto. I have the links all in the appendix of my presentation here that everybody can see when it's sent to them. They also have detailed solar maps, and they'll kind of show you what a basic financial piece would be for that. We have other programs such as the STEP program, which focuses on older MURBs. This is through a different division, but it's through our tower renewal program. And what we do is we aim to get some of those key areas focused on energy, waste, water, and it even expands into safety, operations, and community pieces there. So we have assessments and audits through that, as well as financing. Our energy retrofit loans program is our the loans program through the Better Buildings Partnership. What we do is we offer a pass-through loans of up to 20 years of the City of Toronto's cost of borrowing. This is an unsecured loan, and up to the first year, it is payment-free and interest-free. So it's a pretty good deal for people who are looking to finance a low carbon or an energy savings project. Yeah, we just need to go through and do a little bit of the paperwork. Some of the process, some of the example projects are here listed: windows, envelope upgrades, And then here is the process. Again, this all will all be sent to you at the end. And all of this is under our new existing building strategy. So late last year, it was passed through council that we had 9 different strategy recommendations that came out of the report. I like to call 3 of them the stick, 3 of them the carrot, and 3 of them the microphone. So the first 3 are really the stick. What are we able to require? What are we looking to require within the City of Toronto buildings? We're looking to have something possibly similar to New York in terms of their mandatory targets. So those 3 pieces, we're working through what we can do with our jurisdiction on any of those pieces. Our second piece, our second 3, I would say those are a carrot. So those are the support programs that we offer. Those are the financing programs we offer, and all of those details through the city. And then the last 3, I think, are the microphones. So we do need to build advocacy and awareness from the city to the province to the feds in terms of what we need. From our standpoint, we need to support workforce development, working with the colleges, working with all the different trades and schools. How do we build that workforce out? Because there will be a lot of jobs that are needed for this development, and just build awareness and get everybody on the same page. This was a proposed implementation timeline of what some of those pieces would look like, with the data reporting, the performance targets, and the audits and recommissioning schedules. As you can see, they're quite soon. This was proposed, and right now we are working through the implementation planning. So right now we're taking a look at what does it look like on a voluntary or mandatory basis? When are we going to implement those? We're looking at different consultation schedules with different engagements of different stakeholders. If you want to sign up, the email is right here. And we're doing analysis of the equity and housing affordability impacts, as that's a really important tenement of our Transform TO piece. Thank you. Hopefully I got through it quickly in time enough. And
Thank you.
Stop sharing here.
Yes, and I have also put your link to the webinar tomorrow on the Deep Retrofit Challenge in the chat if anybody wants to follow up on that. And we have 2 more presenters. We have, I believe, so we have David Katz, and we have Scott Bullock from Enbridge. Scott, are you on? And are you able to share your screen? I think you're on mute if you are trying to. Okay, well, we will come back to Scott, and we will have David.
Jasmine, I just saw him in the chat. He said he's on the call.
Oh, okay.
Let's see if we can. And clearly, I'm open to having him speak first and bring up my issues, even on a separate.
I can actually load his presentation on my screen. I am not sure why he's not able to speak. Leon and Dan, maybe you can...
up and then he might be able to unmute.
Share screen. And there we have the Enbridge presentation.
He's saying that he can't access the microphone function. That's not good. Well, Scott, if you allow me, I'm familiar with both the IESO and Enbridge programs. I might be able to talk to your slides in the interest of time. So, sure. Okay. So clearly, I'm David Katz. As I mentioned earlier, I was formerly with Ontario Hydro. I was the financial evaluations officer. I helped set up the whole demand supply plan 25 years ago. And subsequently leaving there, I went into retrofitting multi-res buildings with energy management systems under sustainable environmental solutions and sustainable resources management. So as I mentioned, I was on the Better Building Partnership when it started 25 years ago. And many of the challenges that Rob has said relate to what we're going to agree to. The OEB has basically provided the utilities, both the LDCs and the gas companies, with incentives. And so their programs, as I know from Enbridge, has been around for 20 years. We've used them. We've been with joint presentations to condo boards on changing boilers. As Rob said, it's hard for them to understand. It's still working. Why do I have to change it? There's a lot of things that are programs now that are very prescriptive, and that Enbridge will provide incentives for those. Maybe you can go to the next slide here as well. Or I'm just locking up.
Right, yeah.
So there are issues, as I mentioned, boilers, variable speed drive, ventilation. Most of it's related to the equipment. And the incentive now, oh, sorry, let me go back to your screen. The similar to the energy efficiency programs here, they require a measurement of the taking out the old equipment, putting in the new equipment, and the incentive is then tied to either dollars per unit, and some of the programs, you might just go through the slides because I don't know, I can speak to them. Go forward. This is the thing where I was mentioning that you can have a progressive amount. So the more that you save, the greater the incentive. So should you go and put a new boiler in and you reach the 30 cent cubic meter, but if you increase the efficiency by also fixing the windows and then putting in the boiler, it can go up to 40 cents a cubic meter. So this is very crucial as we talk about deep retrofits, that we can't just do the low-hanging fruit. And when you get money from SOFIAC or TowerWise or whatever, we have to really do deep retrofits in order to take a gas-fired building and basically have it, 40 to 50% GHG reductions for an existing building. We're going to have to do everything we can to reduce the fossil fuel, maybe electrify it, and maybe even go to renewable natural gas, which is something Enbridge is working on. So keep going and we can finish, and all the slides, in addition to the recording, I think we can send out so that everybody has all the information in the interest of time. Oh, there's new construction things that go back. So as well, we're talking about existing buildings, but even a major renovation where, let's say, a building is empty and it's going to be repurposed, there's a design charrette that Enbridge can hold that facilitates the modeling of this. And it is important, as noted in the chat, you have to look at the building as a system in order to do the deep retrofits that this is all about. And similar challenges occur. Both Enbridge provides money to the social housing groups, to the, with Toronto Atmospheric Fund, to the other ownerships. But as noted by, the rental challenges, the condo challenges, in the private sector buildings, we have to overcome these. But there's incentives here, and there's also incentives from the IESO and the Save on Energy site, and all those things that are part of what can be provided. So in addition to Enbridge, for the electricity things, there are those that can be saved as well. Now I might just go to my slides.
Yes, and we'll send out these slides, and I will stop share. And David, yes, you can talk about CABA.
So let me, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. how do I move this up? Okay, so I'm David Katz. As I mentioned before, I've been doing this for over 28 years and been in the energy business for over 40 years. And I started Sustainable Resources Management. But when I was with Ontario Hydro, we set up the Canadian Automated Building Association, similar to providing those companies, those service providers like Honeywell, Johnson, Siemens, Landis & Gyr, incentive for them to improve energy management systems the same way that the ISO or OPA or whatever it was called then provided GE, Sylvania, and Philips money to change the lights. And so CABA, it was a little more challenging because we had all these different proprietary programs. And so CABA was formed over 30 years ago. Tridel, Bell Canada, Public Works, and then across Canada with the utilities providing funding. So this is part of what we're doing. How do I advance the slide? I'm trying to advance. Oh, there we go. So let me close my view. So as you can see, it's changed now to the Continental Automated Building Association, with some of the biggest service providers in the world, Honeywell and Schneider and Siemens, and this is just the board, but we have 380 members, and basically they're the installers, the integrators, the software development. It goes to buildings in general, but we have a home council and we have an intelligent large building council. So the goal is to educate people. And so here are some of the research and the issues that affect both all buildings. And here we see that there's healthy building and indoor air quality. So clearly in light of the pandemic, we see with the recommendation to increase ventilation in buildings that we have to have better filtration, whether it's ASHRAE, whether it's smart filters, whether it's measurement of the filtration. So in addition, it may take more energy, but the deep retrofit has to still have a healthy building, as was pointed out. And these are the opportunities where we get the ventilation right, et cetera. So clearly, these are the kind of issues. You can join CABA, caba.org. You can also get into their public library and download the executive summaries on many of these reports and many other white papers on what we can do to improve our existing buildings, to decarbonize. We have reports from the CAGBC. We have the reports on the deep retrofits that were mentioned earlier by including one by the ESCO Association. So these are the kinds of issues that we're talking about, and many of them can apply to the multi-res sector. Intelligent buildings and COVID, and you can see all the sponsors are on the cover. These are the service providers. And as Rob said, it's not just the technology. You have to get the people to understand it. You have to get the people to see the benefits. You have to get potentially the utilities to provide the incentives. And now we have new innovative ways of financing. And when people have the opportunity to get 1% money, why leave it in your condo reserve fund at 1% or 0% when you can spend that money and improve the building envelope, get better equipment size to the new improved building envelope, whether it's windows, whether it's ventilation, insulation, as pointed out, and then measure it and manage it. And so many of the technologies, as you see in these slides, are looking at how smart home energy management is. We're currently funding this research, and how we've connected the home to AI, and how there's AI and preventative maintenance. Because if we're doing deep retrofits, we have to keep them performing properly. So I'll just quickly go through these. I'll send these slides out. Here is the predictive maintenance and AI and intelligent buildings. So if we just retrofit things, and this was found by many of the commissioning agents, if we don't maintain them and watch over them, they currently then go out of whack, sequence of operations get overridden, and the savings don't occur. And then, as Stuart mentioned, you have battles between the lawyers and the ESCOs, and who did what to guarantee savings. So we in a deep retrofit, we have to look at it holistically, and we can maybe apply some of the artificial intelligence and machine learning to buildings. You know, I won't go through all of these, but there's issues, including many now that are deploying AI systems. I've reviewed 3 proposals for a condo that all differ in savings, but they're all relatively saying we can predict what's happening because of the weather, and we can operate your building at a system better than what's currently programmed in the sequence of operation, which is static.
Just want to let you know we're in our last 5 minutes, David.
Yeah, and I'm just going to go that so we can allow questions to everybody else. So in light of this, intelligent buildings and COVID, we now know that we have to look at the buildings from all the foundations, indoor air quality, dust, pets. Deep retrofits are not just about energy, they're about repurposing and making the buildings healthy, more sustainable, more resilient in light of the storm we just occurred, backup generators, which I just read about. So I'm now on the board of OSEA. I'm starting an energy efficiency council. I welcome everybody to join us on that, and also more information on CABA. You can contact me and I can put you in touch with CABA, and you can go visit caba.org, and I look forward to the questions, if that's all right.
Great. And we can turn it over to Dan.
Yes, thanks so much. I think everybody would agree that Jasmine put on a great agenda for us today. I wanted to thank personally all the speakers, and Jasmine and David are both on the board, and David did mention about the Energy Efficiency Council, which is something OSEA would like to start up. Just a quick note on the Ontario Sustainable Energy Association, of which I'm the chair. We have approximately 100 members. Most are small, medium enterprises, but they range all the way up to Enbridge. We have a number of events coming up. Just very quickly, in June, Jasmine is putting on a ESG and supply chain webinar. In July and August, we're still working on the agendas for a couple of possible options. In September, we have our annual Green Energy Doors Open event, which will be held September 28th. It'll be kicked off by the keynote speaker, David Miller, who's the CEO of C40. And we'll also host our best in class category award winners for sustainable energy technologies. But in this case, we'll also have a municipal focus at the front end of the event. In October, for a date to be announced, we're going to work on a renewable natural gas webinar. And if you're not a member of OSEA, I would urge you please to join us and help us as we try to move forward to a net zero future. And with that, Jasmine, it's your floor to take some questions if you like. And direct them, or whatever you prefer.
I see that people are very interested in getting the slides, and I think there's just a wealth of information there. If anyone has any particular questions they'd like to raise right now, you can put it in the chat. But otherwise, I'd like to thank everybody for bringing up some really interesting challenges, some which I think people are working on, and some which we will hopefully see some solutions to as we move into the future.
Might I pose a question, Jasmine? If we have
Yes.
It goes to the financing in the maybe CMHC, and Stuart can tell me. In light of the opportunities now, initially the multi-res sector and the rentals that we approached, they said we couldn't do this under rent control. We won't be able to pass it through. So is CMHC working with CIB and then hopefully work with SOFIAC, so that, you know, when Rob and I go before a board of a condo, we can explain the different financing options? And maybe Stuart, are you still there, that you might see how that you're overcoming all these things?
I'm afraid Stuart had to leave at 1 on the dot, so he will not be able to answer that, but we can follow up with him on that question.
Well, even the city with TowerWise, you know, if TowerWise loads 1 or 2% to a rental property, is that displacing what the other programs offer, or you're just doing it for the City of Toronto buildings?
I'm not totally sure the answer to that question. I know that from our energy retrofits loan program, we have loaned to a few condo corps, which previously we have not been able to do. It's very hard for them, obviously, to take on debt.
And we were just covering the private sector, but I think TAF is, now looking at expanding. Stuart was on LC3, I think, to municipalities, and some of the things we're going to talk about early on some of our next future events. So thank you, Jasmine.
Okay, and I also want to apologize to all the people that will be viewing this on a webinar because they were not able to log in. It seems that we had some technical difficulties there, but thank you. It looked like a lot of you stayed with us till the end, and thank you so much. We look forward to having you attend again and hear more from you in the future.
Thanks again to all the speakers and to you, Jasmine.
Thanks.
Bye for now.